challenges and successes, hardship and joy, pain and blessings. The dichotomies of life, right? We eagerly embrace successes, joys, and blessings, yet we become frustrated when challenges, hardship, and pain intersect our lives. But what if the tough times of life are just cleverly disguised opportunities to grow? Resilience, strength, wisdom, courage, and grit are grown when we embrace and choose to learn from those challenging times of life. I invite you to tune your ear to the lessons and insights my guests gained when they fought to overcome the tough times that intersected their lives. Consider how their strategies, mindsets, and habits equipped and empowered them to grow, even thrive, despite the challenges they faced. Welcome to the Challenges Won't Stop Me podcast. I'm your host, Melanie Brown. I'm honored you've chosen to listen to this episode. I believe you will be encouraged and inspired to seek to grow through your challenges. Let's keep moving forward. Today's interview is with Jessica Roberts. I met Jessica at the Georgia Author Fair, and it was an instant connection. It's just one of those, if you know, you know. And I knew by her facial expressions, by her mannerisms, that she was full of joy, and there had to be a reason behind it. And well, yes, there is. So welcome to the show, Jessica.
Well, thank you, Mel. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone.
Well, today we're going to talk about Jessica's story. And I was given a copy of her book, Triumphant, One Woman's Journey from Prison to Purpose. Fantastic job of picking a title. And I have read your book, and as you can see, unfortunately the listeners can't, but I've taken a lot of notes because there were many things in your book that really told about the struggles that you faced, but also how important God became in your life. And as you journeyed forward, how you saw the purpose for what you went through. So we're going to dive in and talk about that today.
I was raised in a two-parent home. Prior to my incarceration, I was never in any trouble.
You were a good girl.
I was a good girl. Always walked the straight path. Not a perfect person, but always worked the straight path. I would have been the last one that anybody would have thought ended up in prison. I met my spouse. My whole involvement in this case is due to him and the people he was friends with. So that's how it started. I was incarcerated at 2009, but my book was released in 2019. The case involved 38 people. It's a 38-person indictment, and I was number 38 on the list.
This is the part of the story that I found so interesting. Your husband, his name was Michael, and Michael's father was being released from prison.
Yes.
And Michael's father called his son and said, "Hey, I'd like to come live with you."
Yes.
And that's the beginning of your story.
Yes, and I just wanted to let you know that the names, I changed everybody's names except for mine in the book. So that's not his real name. I even changed my daughter's name. He never had a relationship with his father growing up.
Yes.
And so when his father contacted him, he, I guess, was missing that piece. He wanted that father-son relationship. So he saw that as an opportunity to build a bond with his father. So his father did come live with us after his father served the 15-year prison sentence. So the case that we got involved with, the guy that his father got arrested with before, is the same guy. So his father got out and started keeping the same company that he did prior, when he was incarcerated. Trickled down. The cycle continued.
Now it makes sense about the part in your book that you said, I just wasn't really feeling good about this, because now I know that he's hanging around with the same people that got him in trouble in the first place. Yes, that is a big red flag. Tell us about the time leading up to it where things were happening that then led to the police converging on the property and arresting everyone?
That was just like a real surprise. I had no idea how, because I had never been into any trouble. So I found out through this, if you're a convicted felon, you're not supposed to befriend or be friends with anybody or be around anybody else. That's a convicted felon. I had no idea at the time. Like I said, I'd never been in any trouble, but it's kind of hard not to be around because you have family members, you have cousins, you have co-workers that
Yes.
are even, have records that are convicted felons. So it's kind of hard. Sometimes you don't know. So that was a situation I didn't know. I didn't know the quote unquote law surrounding that. The authorities contacted my husband about his father's friend. They wanted to ask him some questions. And so Michael, the police, the law wasn't his favorite people. So the conversation didn't go well. To me, it was like a vendetta thing. They
Mm.
had a vendetta towards Michael because during the court proceedings, the judge did mention the phone conversation between Michael and the authorities and the response, the way Michael responded, said Michael threatened. And yeah, it was just a regular day for me. I prepared for work, prepared my daughter. I think my daughter was like 27, 22 months at the time. She had a house sitter. So I prepared to take her to the sitter and I was going to go to work. So did that out my front door, and we lived on a hill. So really, you had to be so far down the hill or up the hill to kind of see what was coming and going. So I walked down the steps to my house. And I got to the car and had just opened the door and I was putting my daughter in the car seat. It wasn't really light out. So I look up and I see all these sirens and lights and they just pull up to the house and I'm like, what is going on?
For real, that would
Yeah.
be very scary to
Yeah.
see all of that happening as they're coming. I'm assuming you realize they're coming to us.
Right, right. It was I'm just like in a state of shock. So I never actually put my daughter in the car seat because I pulled back and kind of like held her in my arms and I was just stuck at a standstill. And the authorities, was a female and a male, they approached me and they asked me my name. I told them. They told me I was under arrest. And then that's when the female officer took my child in hand and I lost my mind. I screaming,
Yes.
yes, yes.
Yes. And did they tell you at that time what you were being arrested for?
No, the next question they asked me, where is Michael? And I told them by the time they said that, he heard the commotion and he had come to the front door and he was looking out. He looked out the door and was like, what's going on? He was just in his boxers. And then that's when a few officers swarmed up and they took him down. He wasn't trying to run, but are you Michael? And he said, yeah. And so he was under arrest and they cuffed him. Kids were on their way to school. So they saw we begin to have an audience. So they pushed us, they took it inside the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Michael's father was also arrested at that
Right, but
time.
he was already gone for work. Later on, when we were inside the house, they were asking questions. They couldn't search my home because they didn't have a search warrant. So they were asking questions. They asked where the father was, and we said he was at work. They said, call him up, tell him to come here because they didn't want to arrest him at his job. I called him up, told him what was happening, and he said he'll be there within the hour.
Called a friend to come get your daughter.
Yeah, the sitter that I was going to take her to, she came and the look on her face was like, what is going on? But of course, we couldn't talk like that. She just had to get my child because they said if you don't have anybody here to get your child within 15 minutes or so, she's going to be released to the custody of Child Protective Services. And I did not want that to happen.
Not at all. When did you learn what you had been charged with?
When they took us down, they took us to a big building, the federal building, I think, to the basement of the federal building. And we were held there like all day for so many hours. And I didn't find out what I was charged with until I was actually fingerprinted, booked, and they took my picture. So that's when I found out.
What did they charge you with?
Drug conspiracy.
I remember reading in your book, and I wrote it down because I felt like it was just powerful After you had bonded out and had gotten home, you told yourself you are stronger than your circumstances. Mind over matter.
Right.
It was a God given strength that filled my soul with that get up and fight, don't give up attitude. I knew I had to go on. Where did that come from? If you had not been in trouble and not faced difficult circumstances before, where did you get this powerful communication to yourself?
That was my upbringing. That was my mother and father. They always told us, don't give up. I laugh about it now, and it didn't. When I was writing my book, this came to me. My father taught me how to ride my bicycle without the training wheels. Well, I was gun ho that day to go out ride my bicycle. I was riding it, but I fell several times. After the third fall, I was ready to give up because I had a big bloody gash on my leg. He would not. This is just one of the instances, but it stood out when I started writing my book. He would not let me give up and go inside until I learned how to ride that bike. And by the time I went inside for my bath, my mother was very upset with him because he allowed that to happen. It was concrete. I kept falling on concrete. I learned how to ride that bike. It was my mother and father that instilled that, but my father just really, he was just watching him. He was just a man that tried different things, just different business ideas, different when it comes to education, just different. That's where it started.
How interesting that it came to mind and fueled you and strengthened you at the right time. That's beautiful.
It was amazing.
Yes. As you're waiting to see how this all unfolds, you've been told that your charges would likely get dropped.
Yes.
You did not want to plead guilty because I didn't do this. I'm not responsible. I'm not the person who had the drugs. But that meant that you would likely go to trial.
Okay, when it got to that point, I had to go to court for arraignment. Everybody's assigned a public defender unless you hire an attorney. So I was just going to use the public offender because I had called around to a couple of private attorneys and they were like, I had to kind of explain my situation. Oh, yeah, you can go ahead, go forward with the public, call her a public pretender because they pretend to represent you. Yeah, they say you can probably go ahead with the public defender because the case against you are probably just going to get dropped. And so when I went for arraignment, they called you up, told you what you're being charged with. They'll contact you with a court date. So as my public defender and I were walking out of the courtroom, he whispered to me, he was like, hey, they tell me you are the least culpable one in this thing. He was telling me, but I would have to agree to speak with the authorities. And I kind of took that as I might need to like private attorney lawyer up because no, I've watched some court shows and that's not a good thing when they act like that.
Because they wanted to ask you some questions about Michael and use you against him.
Right. And interrogation, all I could think about was like the court shows, like the police authorities interrogate people.
I have some more notes about what you had thought about and said as all of this is happening. And you said, my attitude was to remain as positive as possible and play the cards we were being dealt. I love this part. I was determined not to break. I was not built to break. Girl, I love that. I'm reading this book and I'm pushing up my arms and my fists and I'm going, yeah, girl,
Yeah.
that's it right there. I love it. I tried to put myself in your shoes thinking, how would I be responding to this? I was a good girl too. I didn't do things to get in trouble. God, she's got some grit and determination and a never give up attitude. I hope I would have had that same attitude as you. I don't know, because as the story goes on, it's just nobody cares what Jessica thinks. You're guilty, girl. I was amazed. Fast forward a little bit, you do something that I found very interesting because you didn't like them asking you questions about Michael. You knew what the purpose was. So you went to Michael and suggested that you get married. And why did you do that?
Well, because he and I talked about it. After I hired my private attorney, she was like on my team, which, your attorney should be on your team. But I guess after she had conversation with the prosecutors, her attitude toward me flipped because she's my attorney, and every time she would contact me, it was always threats and what they're going to do to you if you don't say this and you don't say that. And my attitude was like, look, I had no involvement in it. I'm not going to come down and let them interrogate me and flip the story and make me say things that are not true. And I even said, if Michael did something, get him for what he did. Do not involve me. After just several times of her doing that, Micah and I talked about it, and I was like, look, if you did something, they're going to get you, but I'm not going to get up on the stand and tell their story and lie, because if they have concrete evidence against you, why are they coming at me like this? The only way they cannot use me against you is that we get married. I never wanted to get married or even dream that, I would get married under those circumstances. I was playing the cards that we were dealt.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that broke my heart in your story is that you would go in the bathroom during breaks at work and just cry and plead with God. Tell me about your mindset. And I mean, I get why you went there. You can only hold it in for so long, and then you've got to let it out. Talk about what God did during those times when you would meet with Him and be so vulnerable.
Like you said, you got to get that stuff out. So I felt I couldn't trust anybody, and I was embarrassed that I was even involved in this situation. So I couldn't trust like coworkers or even friends, just like my immediate family knew. Once I would go in the restroom and have those releases, although I was crying, that was like I considered my system. I was having that purge, that cleanse that I need. Every time that I did it, I cried it out in the stall, and when I left the stall, I was okay. That was me in my mind. It's going to be okay. It's a process, a very ugly process, but I just felt better just having that purge, that being able to cry it out and talk to Him.
Yes. What you had written in your book was you said to God, fill me with strength. Clearly, He did.
Yeah.
Because you kept going, you kept moving forward despite really difficult circumstances. Before we get to the trial, talk about what the sentence would be if you were convicted.
Well, I was facing 10 years, a 10-year federal prison sentence. I got in the courtroom. They sentenced me to 27 months, but I had to admit to something. They made me admit to being in the car with Michael one day, and he drove down south. He had drugs in the car. Trial had already happened. Trial was 3 days. And then we got convicted on the third day. When we came back from sentencing, I shouldn't have been asked any other questions that were because trial was over. But it was like I was on trial again. And so when they did that, the judge, I still wouldn't break. I was like, I'm not saying that. It didn't happen. So the judge was like, do you want me to give you a few minutes to go to the back and think about it? I said, yeah. And
Wow.
yeah, they brought my father back there, and he was like, look, just say it so they won't give you 10 years. Just say what they want you to say. And I'm like, I'm not saying it because it's a lie.
Oh my goodness.
And finally, they brought Michael back there, and he was like, Jessica, go ahead and say it. He said, go ahead and say it. You can appeal our sentencing. Go ahead and say it. And that's when I just finally was like, okay. I said, okay. And they brought me back out. And the judge asked the question again. He said, on this date, whatever date it was, you were in the car with Michael driving down south and you had drugs in the car. And I just shook my head. Yeah. He said, you got to verbalize it. I said, yes. He said, well, maybe that good name you made for yourself will do you some good when you're released from prison. And he sentenced me to 27 months. And he said, well, I'm going to do you another favor. I'm going to give you a break. He was like, I'm going to release you today. And within 30 days after today, you'll receive a letter in the mail to what prison you are to turn yourself into. And I was the only one that walked out of the court that day.
Wow. While it doesn't seem fair that you got that sentence,
Right.
as opposed to 10 years,
Right.
that is a significant difference. It's an answer to prayer. We're given a lighter sentence because it appeared in the book that it didn't matter if you committed this or not. You had been named, you were going down for it. As you said, you were playing the cards you were dealt. I feel like many of the cards were stacked against you unnecessarily. I think you just were at the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people.
Right. The only thing I had to go by was what I saw on television or, hearing about somebody in the newspaper being arrested or whatever. I just thought I would be given a fair trial. And there were a lot of things that weren't just and a lot of things that were unfair that I learned that if you get it in front of the right judge and the right prosecutors, they all have lunch with each other. They're all buddies. They'll let certain things fly. They don't care. They don't care about playing with your life. I didn't look at it as a blessing being sentenced to 27 months versus 10 years. It hadn't set in then.
Right,
Yeah, right.
But let's talk about the fact that you were at the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people.
Although it may be unfair, you are judged by the company that you keep. That reminds me of 1 Corinthians 15:33. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character.
Amen.
So I say be mindful. If somebody that you're around, whether it's your sister, brother, I don't care the relation, get from around them. You can have a talk with them about you don't need to do that or you don't need to live that lifestyle, etc. But you make sure you get yourself from around that person or those persons.
So that red flag that you felt when Michael invited his dad to come live with you, and you learned not only was he a felon, but the friend was a felon, that was the wrong people. That red flag, you felt it, you just didn't necessarily act on it.
Right. Yeah. That's how I learned to stand in my truth, stand in my beliefs and what I believe in. And I don't care who gets mad at you because at the end of the day, when you find out you're around somebody that's into some activity that's illegal or whatever, when you have a conversation with them and their attitude is like they're not going to change, they're going to do it anyway, that's a selfish type individual. That individual is no good for you to be around anyway.
Yes. I guess the lesson, the takeaway that I got from it is you were a good girl, but you happened to be around the wrong people at the wrong time, at the wrong place. And while you were innocent, you still received the consequences.
Right.
And that's really life.
That's life.
It's life.
That's life. Yeah.
And I felt bad for you. I did. I felt so bad for you, but it brought that, what we've been told all our lives.
Right.
Don't hang around the wrong people.
Right.
Putting myself in your shoes, how you were going to deal with being in prison. Eye-opening for you.
Yes.
But talk about when you were in there, how you framed your mindset and how you interacted with people and what activities you did while you were there.
Like you just mentioned, it was very shocking. You see movies and everything about it, but it's very eye-opening. So I remain myself. I didn't involve myself in the activities that some say they're just doing it for doing their prison stay. Like very childish like activities. I remain myself, and of course, they knew I was different from them because a lot of the ladies, most of all of the ladies had been incarcerated before. This is my first time. So they knew I was different and I knew they were different. But I wasn't just because I was not going to not be myself. I didn't know how to not be myself. So I didn't understand that mindset or attitude that people say, for their stay, they may take part in these activities or act this way. But that wasn't my mindset. I'm still going to be Jessica. I'm Jessica. I'm a professional. I'm Jessica. I'm myself. I just believe the mind is a powerful thing. And once you break and you just take on anything and start acting anyway, it's over. Like it's like mentally, I wouldn't be mentally sound anymore. So I just did not let go of that.
And I remember reading that you were given a Bible. You went straight for the book of Job.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That would not have been my first choice. So why Job?
Well, when I was being arraigned and they released me, my cellmate, I didn't know her prior to the case, but she was on the case. And as I walked out of the courtroom, her family told me, God bless you. God has a call on your life because I'm the only one that was being released and able to turn myself in. And they said, read Job.
And what did you take away from the book of Job?
I took away Job and my story was similar. It was similar, like losing everything. So that was the first takeaway. Like, oh, I felt like Job. I lost everything. And then I felt like that's when the spiritual side of me began to take over because I was raised in the church, but I didn't have a personal relationship with God. It's just religious, just doing, okay, on Sundays you go to church, you say amen. That was it. But when I became incarcerated and my mother and father, no one could help me, God was taking the blinders off little by little. And I began to see things in a different light from a different perspective. Job lost everything, but God would not let the devil take his life. He was tested and tried, but he would not let him take his life. It resonated with me really, really deep.
By having this experience, did you give your life to Christ while you were in prison?
Yeah, I did because I was in prison, so I never wanted people to see me cry because to me that come off as weak. Although I'm a human being, in the shower, I just would cry out to him. Just I have to go through this. I must go through this. Just be with me, never leave my side. And so I found comfort in that, and that's where that strength came from. I'm in prison physically, but not mentally and spiritually.
I like that. I like that a lot.
I was on probation, I think, maybe a little over 8 years. So it was close to the 10 years that they were originally going to sentence me to. And plus, I got a fine. They put a fine on me that I had to pay.
Did you feel God's presence? Did you actually feel his presence, or did you just say, God says he's going to be with me, so I'm going to believe it?
I felt the presence. I felt the presence of the Holy Spirit. Like I tell people, I call it, I heard the voice. Like I heard
Mm,
the voice. Like I hear the voice now to this day. So
yes.
hearing it back then and seeing the results once I heard it, that's why when I hear it now, I obey it.
Yes,
And then,
ma'am.
but it's just amazing how God will use your story and your testimony to encourage and inspire and lead others to Him.
Absolutely. You wrote, I thanked God for humbling me and revealing lessons I needed to learn.
Yeah.
Girl,
Yeah, yeah. Because, like I said, I was always known as a good person. I never just had like envy or anger just to people. I just, that wasn't my way.
well, one of the things I took away from your book is this girl, Jessica, does not let challenges stop her, which I absolutely love. Here's how I know this. After being wrongly accused and wrongly imprisoned and having to serve that prison sentence, you went on to complete your BS degree.
Right.
And now, and this was a conversation that we had at the author fair because I was so interested that this is what you do now. You now mentor females at a federal halfway house and females at a local jail.
And I have my master's now. But
Yes.
yeah, I call myself a reentry activist. I stay out there attending meetings, advocating on behalf of the formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated women and men.
I absolutely love the fact that you are choosing to put yourself in the very environment where you were wrongly accused and had to suffer
Right.
for 27 months plus all the years of probation. It is because of God,
Yes.
because He has done a work in you and you have a tender heart for those women and men, and you want to help them get to a place where they have hope for their future and that they believe that it's possible.
That's what it's all about, Mel. It's
Yes.
about giving people hope because even people that are not incarcerated, I talk to those folks as well because people deal with, you just have dark times in your life. You
Yes.
have things that you think you just can't overcome. You just think your life is over. Although our stories may differ, the connection and how it looks same, it's just that there's things to overcome. This is a part of my God given purpose. So I had to get rid of this shame. Well, that's what resonates with people with my story.
Make sure that you get a copy of Jessica's book. It is titled Triumphant: One woman's journey from prison to purpose. Well, Jessica, this has been fabulous. Thank you for your willingness to share about a very challenging time in your life and about how God was such a part of it. Thanks so much for being a part of the show today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, listening audience, for tuning in.